Valorant claims there are 4 different classes of agents: controllers, duelists, initiators, and sentinels. In general, teams play one of each plus a fill. This is not always strictly followed though. Notably, for a while back in 2022, there were some popular comps that traded out the duelist for an initiator. Today, we are going to discuss why the way Valorant labels agents kinda sucks, and why a large portion of the player base misunderstands these labels. Our first class, controllers, is by far the most distinguishable class. All 6 controllers have long-lasting orb smokes. The role of controllers is pretty clear to most players. You use your smokes to isolate a site when executing on attack. And on defense, use your smokes and any supportive util you have to delay executes or to smoke off entrances when doing a retake. The Valorant wiki sums up controllers pretty well. The abilities of agents under this role allow them to assist their teammates by cutting enemy vision, taking control of an area, and forcing enemies into choke points. The next class we're going to talk about is sentinels. Overall, the sentinel label is pretty good. There's definitely a core of agents that feel like sentinels and others that are kinda sus. We're going to save Chamber for later, but another one people tend not to talk about much is Sage. Sage has always felt like a fake sentinel to me. One of the most valuable things about sentinels is their ability to consistently detect flanks. This comes because most sentinels have a passive info utility. Sage has no such ability, and Deadlock's sound sensors aren't guaranteed to detect a flank, but at least there's something. Like every time the enemy team has a Sage, or sometimes when they have a Deadlock as well, I'm instantly thinking we need to consistently pressure the flanks and take space on defense because they just don't have a good flank watch. That being said, Sage and Deadlock are good at the other job of sentinels, which is anchoring sites. The wiki describes sentinels as having an emphasis on supporting the rest of the team through providing intel, anchoring down sites, and preventing the enemy from flanking. Which isn't a bad definition, but providing intel and preventing the enemy from flanking are kind of 2 sides of the same coin. Alright, so now that we covered the 2 good classes, let's cover the 2 bad classes. We're going to talk about initiators and duelists together, but we're going to start with the duelists. Duelist is probably my least favorite out of all the labels in Valorant. The variety among duelists cause them to be played very differently. There are the dive duelists which have the ability to quickly get on site using movement abilities, and the true duelists or the fighter duelists. These are the ones designed to take 1v1s at an advantage, which is what most people think of when they think of duelists. On defense, duelists can be good at holding aggressive angles or even pushing out and taking space. The dive duelists can get away with their movement abilities, and the fighting duelists can generally give themselves an advantage before peeking by either shielding up or flashing and being able to heal afterwards if they do take damage. Back when Bind was in the pool, my defensive KD on Phoenix was 1.4. Subtle flex. With all the close angles on Bind, Phoenix is really good at flashing around corners and peeking as the enemy is preparing for an execute. You know who else is good at holding aggressive angles on defense? That's right, it's time to talk about him. Chamber. Chamber isn't a sentinel. He has one ability, his little shitty scanner thing, trademark, and that is his only claim to being a sentinel. You see a lot of former Chamber mains now that fill duelist roles on pro teams, most notably our favorite washed unk EG player Ye, who has been playing a lot of Phoenix recently. Now, I'm not arguing Chamber's a duelist, that's stupid, he just simply doesn't fit nicely into any of the classes. Like last video, I claimed Sova's shockbolt was a molly, which is dumb as shit, but when you force categories on stuff, there are bound to be some things that just don't fit well into any of them, and this is Chamber when talking about the agents. Alright, we're done with Chamber, let's go back to talking about the duelists and the initiators. It's time to bring in the initiators. If the duelist label is the least useful label in Valorant, initiator is easily the most misunderstood. Like, initiating what exactly? Well, the name is supposed to mean initiating executes, but this is one of the many things, and I'd argue not even the most important thing, that initiators are supposed to do. The wiki describes their role as initiating attacks on site, flushing enemies out of hiding spots and corners in order to assist the team when charging into battle. Now, I'll be real with you, I hate this definition. It fails to mention initiators' most important role, which is info. Out of the 7 initiators, 6 of them gather info in some way. Fade has Haunts and her ult, KO has Knife, Skye has a dog and gets a voiceover when the birds pop. Sova and Teo have their drones, and Gecko has Dizzy, which reveals enemy locations, and Wingman, which can be used like a boombot in lieu of him planting the spike. Initiators also help to stun and blind during an execute. They can also be really good at stalling an attack on defense, but the main thing that distinguishes them from duelists is their info gathering abilities, which allow them to clear a large amount of space. So which initiator doesn't have this? Breach. I think both Breach and Raze are both basically on the line between duelist and initiator. Raze has a phenomenal kit for clearing a large amount of space, and her dive capabilities are mostly mid, except at the very highest levels. Ask yourself, if you're below diamond, when was the last time you saw a Raze actually properly execute onto site? But as Raze, you can chuck a nade back site and throw a boombot down, and you have more clear than most of the initiators. Breach, on the other hand, has no info gathering abilities, an artillery damaging ability, and a flash. One of my friends plays both Breach and Phoenix, and she plays them almost identically, either stunning up enemies or flashing them before aggressively peeking them. That being said, like most initiators with flashes could make their own entry, so why isn't Sky a duelist? Why not KO? This is where I want to stress again that the main thing differentiating duelists and initiators in Valorant as they have them now is the ability to gather info. KO and Phoenix are almost identical in terms of abilities. 3 of them are the same. Both have a molly, both have a flash, and both have an ult that gives them an extra life. So what's different? KO has a knife for gathering info and suppressing enemies, while Phoenix has a wall for isolating fights. So now we're going to bring in the chart from last week. Yes, I know the chart is flawed. Yes, there are a lot of abilities that could be in 2 or more categories, but just hear me out. In general, this chart can help us classify the agents. Every agent that has passive info is a sentinel. If you see yellow next to an agent, they are a sentinel. Every agent that has an orb smoke besides Jet is a controller, and hers only lasts 2.5 seconds, so it doesn't count. But how do we differentiate between duelists and initiators? Well, with the exception of Raze and Yoru, all the active info abilities are on initiators, and every initiator has one except for Breach. There were several comments last week asking why passive and active info got broken apart, but stuff like mollies didn't, and this is why. If you know an agent has a passive info ability, they're a sentinel. If they have an active info ability, they are probably an initiator. It's starting to feel like, at least to me, that drawing this line between duelists and initiators is just pointless. You're telling me Raze and Phoenix are in the same category, but Phoenix and Breach aren't? And if you're typing a comment or screaming at your screen right now that the whole point of duelists is to be the first one on site, like we talked about earlier, most of the initiators are just as good as doing that as, say, Phoenix or Reyna. So now I'm going to ask the question, are these classes even helpful? I feel like half of the time when people are filling and trying to make sure we have one of each class, that's just a crutch for not being able to think. For example, I had this comp the other day. Jet, Sage, Killjoy, Sova, Clove. Do you see the problem? Yeah, no flashes. The killer, the Sova, had switched off of Phoenix at the last second. And when we asked him, round 1, why he did that, he said, we needed an initiator. And by Valorant's logic, he was right. But no. No flashes, no entry, and we lost terribly. So if you are going to fill, at least make sure the agent you are playing actually makes sense in your comp, not just on paper with Valorant's role system. Because if you just roll the dice and choose one of each agent, you're not very likely to get a good comp. Let me know what you think down in the comments, and until next time, stay Valorant. So I was midway through editing this video and hopped on to play a couple of games, and Valorant sent me this survey. It's about changing how the new maps get integrated into the game, into the competitive queue at least, and it's awful. It's on screen right now if you want to pause and read, but the video Friday is going to be about this. Valorant just handed me free content, but this is just an awful idea. I don't know why they're even asking people if they want this.